Jhonen Vasquez argues that violence is just human nature. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a graphic novel that I read. I am back on that graphic novel grind, and today's graphic novel is all about homicidal maniacs and murder. I am referring to Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. This is actually the director's cut, which was written by Jhonen Vasquez and published around 1995 originally. The director's cut obviously came sometime later. For those who don't know, Jhonen Vasquez is an American writer, a Latino-American writer. They've been writing since the 1990s, maybe before that, getting published at least in the 90s. They've written a number of graphic novels, various series, but they're probably most famous for this, and they also have contributed to the world of animation as they are the creator of Invader Zim, which is very funny. It's a Nickelodeon show about an alien who's trying to take over Earth, and the two sort of teenagers who are obsessed with proving that this kid that they're going to school with is an alien who's trying to destroy things. It's a very fun show. This is my first time encountering Jhonen's work. I was actually sent this by one of my friends, name of Moose or something like that's his nickname. He really wanted me to read this, and so I have, and I do think I enjoyed it somewhat, although there are some problems that I think I'll note when I get to the analysis section. But without further ado, let's talk about Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac focuses on the titular Johnny, or Nini, as he goes by his nickname. It's a really weird nickname. But at the beginning of the story, we see a boy talking to his parents who don't seem to care about him. He's scared about weird noises that he's hearing. They just tell him to go back to his room. And when he does, he finds the window has been broken, and Johnny has broken in and is asking about how to clean off some blood that's on him, and he gives the boy some advice. The boy's name is Todd, but Johnny calls him Squee throughout the series, and he just notes that sometimes your parents won't care about you. You have to make the best of it, and some people deserve to be killed or are annoying. And then he tells Squee that if his window, he broke his window because it was locked, and if it's ever locked again, he'll have to kill Squee, which terrifies him. And then the story just kind of focuses on, or not really a story, it's just a series of comics, I think, but it focuses on various adventures that Johnny goes on. He takes a survey from a survey person, and the survey person is like, how do you explain this uptick in violence, and how do we protect the victims? And Johnny asserts that violence is just part of human nature, and that maybe there aren't any such things as victims because maybe they deserved it, or they did something to the perpetrator that caused them to want to be killed, which is a horrific series of statements there. And then Johnny also goes to a taco joint and kills everyone there because they called him wacky. Johnny continues to kill, and he feels an impulse to kill, and he's also sad that he's kind of driven this way, doesn't really know what to make of it. We also see a series of comics about Happy Noodle Boy, which is every bit as insane as Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. It's just a different character there. Later, Todd or Squee is at the mall. He can't seem to find his mom, and another guy says, I'll take you to your parents. He tries to take Squee outside, but it appears this man is like a pedophile of some sort, and Johnny ends up killing this person and saying that Squee's going to have to look out for himself because his parents clearly aren't doing it. And Johnny's kind of anguish about what he's doing builds up so much that he finally decides to kill himself. And after that, Devi, I think is her name. She's someone who's was in a relationship with Johnny, is at his place and tries to escape, along with Kirk, who reveals himself to be some sort of neo-Nazi. They're trying to escape from a weird tentacle creature that's inside Johnny's house. Kirk ends up getting killed, and Devi also seemingly gets killed because the Johnny's house is in a formless void now, which suggests that the universe has ended. It's not exactly clear. But from there, Johnny ends up in heaven, although he's just visiting, as people say. He confronts God and asks, what's this all about? Why was I made to suffer and all of that? And it appears that God doesn't really care. And also the people are kind of really just stationary in heaven. And Johnny's upset that they're not really moving around or using their powers that they apparently have in heaven, which he causes a bunch of people to explode, and they come back and explode again. And this upsets the people who are in control of heaven, so they send him down to hell where he belongs. And he confronts the devil, who says that Johnny was just sort of like cleaning up the waste or something like that of the world. And Johnny seems to be doing fine in hell, but he's upset again because people are sticking to the traditions of the regular life. They're apparently using money and all of that, and Johnny's just demanding to know why that is. And at this point, the people of hell just decide to have Johnny resurrected. And as the story comes to a close, we see a couple more volumes, and he continues killing, and that's just sort of how it ends. In terms of analysis, there is a little bit worth talking about with Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. It's really hard to talk about this because it's not one strict story, but all of the volumes in this sort of thing sort of have a common theme, and I also think Jhonen Vasquez would probably argue that this is not meant to be taken seriously, that it's merely about violence or something like that, and how we respond to it, and any sort of in-depth analysis kind of misses the point. And maybe that's true, but also if there's no point to it, like, why make it at all? All art is meant to be criticized, and that's what I'm doing here. But one of the things Vasquez seems to be talking about is human violence. Violence is seen as normal in Johnny's eyes. It's unavoidable, part of human nature. People are always going to be violent because humans haven't changed since the dawn of time. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. The violent crimes? All perfectly natural in a society whose advances are limited to its technology. The basic behavior of the modern human is hardly different from that of its primitive ancestors. The only noticeable changes are trends. Whether in a suit or in a loincloth, people are ignorant little thorns, cutting into one another. They seem incapable of advancing beyond the violent tendencies which at one time were necessary for survival. And that's just an interesting quote, kind of very pessimistic about humanity, saying that it's not enough changes about us. We're always going to stick to violence, and there's nothing that can be changed about that. And then the next statement, Johnny seems to assert that some people deserve violence, or they did something to deserve it, which could be a joke here. It could be an absurdist statement. But it does raise the question of, like, do some people deserve violence? And the obvious answer here is no, they don't, because that is a horrific kind of thing to think about another person. Yes, some people do annoying things, and Johnny's sort of exacerbating that by saying that person who cut you off in traffic or the person who chewed gum too loudly, they deserve to die. But if you believe that, if you truly believe that, then you can do some horrific things to other people. So I'm not really sure I agree with Vasquez saying that this is a base part of human nature, because if it was, we probably would have destroyed each other a long time ago, and we never would have made it to this point. Another thing about this series is the idea of nihilistic suffering. Johnny's life is full of personal anguish, but he sees anguish around in other people too. He hears lots of voices, hallucinates things, and he lives in squalor. There's blood on the walls. He's not doing too well. Surely there's a reason for the suffering, you might think. Like, there has to be purpose to the world. But Vasquez would argue that it's all just sort of meaningless, that none of this is for any purpose. And if there is a God, he certainly doesn't care. He's not going to release you from your suffering. Allow me to read you another interesting quote from this. Sometimes you can cry until there is nothing wet in you. You can scream and curse to where your throat rebels and ruptures. You can pray all you want to whatever God you think will listen, and still it makes no difference. It goes on with no sign as to when it might release you, and you know that if it ever did relent, it would not be because it cared. Which is very that's a very hard quote right there. That, sometimes it seems like there's nothing there. It's all meaningless. And if there is something there, and you do stop feeling that pain that you're feeling, it's not because it cares. We live in an uncaring, unfeeling universe. That's all life is right there. And it's not like if there is an afterlife, it's any better, because when Johnny goes to heaven, God doesn't care. Like, they made the universe and they want to do nothing else. And people just seem to be moving aimlessly around in heaven, and in hell they're still sticking to the ways of the old world, paying for things and contributing to the misery that was on earth. And Johnny just wants to know why all of that is happening. It is a very interesting sort of line of thinking that Vasquez contributes to here, but I do think it overall clashes with the tone of the other parts of the comic, because it's very silly. Like you have these very silly bits where Johnny does very absurd things, and then you have these bits where he's pondering about suffering and all of that, and it just feels like it doesn't really belong together. Like, you can't say that a guy cut you off in traffic so he deserves to die, and then simultaneously say that all of life is suffering, because in some way you're responsible for that suffering. You could lean on the absurdism crutch that Vasquez is trying to highlight the absurdity of the world, reveling in the absurd and showing how Johnny knows that it's like the myth of Sisyphus. Like, he sees the through line that we're all just pushing a boulder up a hill just for it to come tumbling down at the end of the day. Maybe that's kind of true, but I still feel like there's the tone clashes here and doesn't land the message as well as Vasquez thinks it does. The other problems that I have with this as well, I think the art is pretty cluttered. It's black and white, and a lot of text is scrunched in a small place, which is very hard to read. So I don't think it's designed particularly well. And there's another question of, like, am I reading too deeply into this? As I said earlier, is this just trying to be edgy? Is it trying to be a joke? It was made in the 90s. It's a product of the late 90s where things were trying to be edgy. I like to think something similar to the Kick-Ass comic book about the boy who becomes a vigilante, and there's a lot of edginess sort of there, along with The Mask as well. Like, and there's, I'm sure those authors would argue that there is no inherent point, that they're not trying to make a grand statement like I'm trying to say here. But at the same time, like, if it all is just a joke, like, then what's the point of it? Like, why am I reading it? If there's no overall purpose, if you're not trying to say anything, then you're only trying to entertain. And why am I wasting my time reading this if it doesn't serve any purpose? And there are a great many things that don't serve great purposes, but if you're making art, that art has to be a statement on something. Otherwise, it's a formless void. And although being a formless void is something that Johnny the Homicidal Maniac would be appropriate for, I do think that maybe there is something there, but also I can picture the people who like this, or even Vasquez kind of laughing at me for trying to assess something deeper to it, which I feel is weird. But I do think all of that is there, even if maybe they didn't intend for it to be there. It's just not written particularly well. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. I thought it was fine, an interesting graphic novel, certainly different from what I've read before. I can only think of the comparison of, like, Kick-Ass or maybe the Sandman. But even the Sandman takes its sort of ideas a little bit further, and I don't think this goes as far. So it's an interesting one. I don't think I'm going to recommend it to you out there. There's certainly better fare that expresses similar ideas out there, and is much better designed in terms of art and whatnot, in a way that doesn't make it hard to read. So, those are my thoughts on it. If you have anything to say about it or anything you want to say about my review, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this or this author if they want to, check it out themselves. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and homicidal travels. Hopefully not. Farewell.